welcome. This is the Reach Code Breakout. I think you made a wise decision to come to this breakout session, so welcome. I guess first I should introduce the panel. And so who I've got seated directly to my left is Jim Guerra, and he's the building official for the city of Goleta. They adopted a REACH code, is it going on about a year and a half ago? About a year and a half ago. And he's going to tell the story of what it took for his city to adopt the REACH code. Edison was involved through our Codes and Standards program. In fact, personally, I was involved in providing some technical assistance. But Jim tells the story much better than I, so he's going to tell the story. Then we have Stephen Davis. He's with, right now you're in Redwood City, right? But before you worked for various cities.
Yes.
And he's going to give the perspective and the story, you know, from a Northern California version. And what you're going to, basically this becomes a tale of two cities, okay? But the common themes are the importance of political support, outreach, and things like that. So those are universal, but you can see, even if you go through those same steps, how it differs. And in this case, it's a very good contrast. But they both got there, so, which is great. And then we have Martha Brooks, all the way by the wall. Hopefully you all can see her. She's over there. And she's going to talk about, she's with the California Energy Commission. And her role really today is to kind of explain differences between the REACH code under Title 24, Part 6, which is the Energy Building Code, and then there's CalGreen, right, the Green Building Code, which is Title 24, Part 11. And then there's voluntary tiers that also deal with energy efficiency, and it really creates a lot of confusion. So Martha's going to try to explain that, or not try, will explain that to you, but also talk about the future of REACH codes with respect to the newly adopted 2013 Energy Code. So I'm sure Martha would really be able to tackle that, or at least give the perspective from the California Energy Commission perspective. As you know, the CPUC, the California Public Utility Commission, they pretty much set the policy. The California Energy Commission, you know, kind of helps implement that policy through the Energy Code. And again, I'll let Martha kind of explain that, because I think it's very important that you really understand who the major players are. And where did CalGreen come from? Like, who came up with that? I mean, those are things that we'll try to address as well. And then, of course, the zero net energy. They're all related. They're all coming from different perspectives. So with that said, I'm going to hand over the mic to Jim. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
And we'll start with Jim, and then Stephen, and then Martha. Okay. And then what I'm going to try to do, we're good until 3:45. So hopefully each of my presenters will take maybe 10 minutes or so. And then we want to encourage Q&A. So let me ask my presenters, do you want to just go through your 5-minute, 10-minute presentation and then entertain Q&A at the end? Yeah, okay, so sure. We'll do it that way. That way everybody gets that context, and we'll do it that way. So with that said, Jim?
Great. Thank you. As Javier said, my name is Jim Guerra. I'm the contract building official for the city of Goleta. My background is building and safety. I have 43 years of experience in the building and safety profession. I have been building official in 26 different cities. That usually means I'm very good at what I do, or I can't keep a job. We'll find that out in the end. But I have been the building official in Goleta since incorporation in 2002. As I said, I am a contract building official, a little bit different term. A number of cities do not have their own employees acting as building officials. They actually contract the service out. Willdan Engineering is one of the firms that does it. We pioneered the concept back in 1979. It works a little bit on the Lakewood model in LA County about contract services. So if you can contract out sheriff or police, you can contract out building and safety. So as we go forward with the energy code, and there's a number of contract building officials that actually do the enforcement of it. As I've said, we pioneered it in 1979. We have over 150 municipal clients. We actually do power plants for the CEC, also as building official for power plants. Not that we're building a lot of those right now. We're building official in the city of Rosemead, Edison's home territory. And I have to admit, Edison walks the walk. They have done primarily, they did a $23 million tenant improvement on one of their existing buildings. It was as energy efficient as they could possibly make it. So it was a pleasure to work with them on that. But again, this is about the city of Goleta. City of Goleta incorporated in 2002. It took 3 elections to get it. The history was after each election, they refined the area down. And they kind of looked at who was not in favor of incorporating and finally came up with a city of some 28,000 that was willing to incorporate. As follows the history of most cities incorporating, including the new ones that are incorporating in Riverside County. Almost always it's land use. Very few cities incorporate so they can adopt REACH codes. It's generally not the motivation for incorporation of cities on that. It's almost always local control. Sometimes it's a major issue like Hacienda Heights fighting the La Puente landfill. But mostly it's about land use. And that was the purpose of the city of Goleta. And again, in there, it again is primarily a residential city. However, it has a large research and development area, primarily started through UCSB. So some of the entrepreneurs from UCSB have a number of their startup businesses there. Raytheon has been a major developer there. So we do have an interesting mix of projects that are there. But what we feel most proud about, as we'll talk about, the REACH code is on our remaining build out, we only have about 400 acres, but it's already in process on it, and all of it will benefit from the REACH code. So we weren't the first to do the REACH code, but we do think the timing was right for us on what's coming through the pipeline. So our code adoption history is very standard. As I've said, I've done a number of cities. I've done a number of new cities, and almost without exception, every new city adopts the current county ordinances that are in effect. So Goleta basically adopted the Santa Barbara County ordinance, which was basically, if you recall, we were going through a gap in building code adoption. So it was the 1998 California Building Code, 1997 UBC, with the related energy on that. So nothing special about our incorporation. We went through our first full cycle code adoption, 2007. So we adopted again, pulling forward all the current ordinances, nothing special on that. But where we changed it was the 2010 adoption of the California Building Code, including CalGreen, which became effective on January 1, 2011. While we did not do any additional tiers, we did do our REACH code. So a little bit on our history of the REACH code. I actually attended a workshop presented by Edison, which had the idea, the excellent idea, of taking all of the jurisdictions within a climate zone and brought all of the cities together and the county together with the idea of let's do it in this climate zone, let's do it as a group, and let's adopt a REACH code. Now, the model for us was the city of Santa Barbara, which is the first city in our area, well, I'm sorry, the only city at that time to have adopted a REACH code. And they sort of set the bar, and all of the cities came together to avoid a Brown Act violation. We only had, below the majority for each of the representatives, so at least 2 from each of the political jurisdictions there came together. And we got a lot of information. We got sample ordinances. And again, we had the City of Santa Barbara ordinance to look at. And for all of the reasons on zero net energy, for following the state goals and standards, it all made sense to us as the building officials for the city. It made sense to our community and environmental planning director, Steve Chase. And when I get to lessons learned, there's always helps to have a champion in the process on it. He certainly was part of that, and assigned his senior planner, a woman named Cindy Moore, to sort of head the process up. So again, ours started with Edison. Edison helped us to seed the process to get us to do it. And we did the basic model on a reach code. We did basically 15% over Title 24. And that's a basic reach code. And for us, the decisions we had to make were we going to do additions on that? And that's a very key decision as to affecting additions. We, as a staff level, sort of bounced it back and forth, and we took maybe the coward's way out. We settled on 500 square feet for residential, and that's a triggering point for most school districts, for most school district fees. And you often, especially if in some city school district fees are approaching $4 a square foot. So sometimes people will make a decision on an addition at less than 500 square feet in order to not have to pay school fees. But we did not exclude additions. In the model ordinance, it lets the city set that standard on it. So our standard was at 500 square feet on that one, and that's sort of a key one. We did apply it to commercial, although commercial additions is not a key part of the REACH code on that. You don't get many commercial additions for the most part on that, especially in this environment. As I said, on the adoption of the REACH code, it is not like the adoption of the building code. The process for the building code is regulated by the Building Standards Commission. They're basically, if you wish to go beyond the building code, if you have an issue with fire danger, if you have an issue that's local to yours for earthquake, you need to make a local finding as to why you want to do that. Basically here in California, as we adopted a state code some 20 years ago, closer to 30 now, the idea was to uniform the process statewide as much as possible, to minimize local amendments to the building code unless they were based on geographical, topographical, climatic reasons on that. But differently with the adoption of the REACH code is actually a financial performance. Again, with a consultant that had worked with Edison, you are required to submit to the California Energy Commission what the net effect of your REACH code is. And fortunately, we had some modeling numbers that we were able to submit as part of the process. So the building code goes to the Building Standards Commission. The REACH code goes to the California Energy Commission on that. We'll hear a little bit more on the process of that one. These are pretty much user-friendly processes because we had never done a REACH code for us. It was it was an educational part of it, but once we sort of understood the process on it, getting it on agenda, getting it before them, the process does support what you're doing. It isn't an obstacle to the adoption of a REACH code. Question about comparison to Cal Green before we got started on it. Separate from the development of the REACH code is the new Cal Green building code on the energy code on that. It's California Green Building Standards, commonly called Cal Green. It has a number of requirements that were never present before on this, but it is strictly for new buildings on that. And in the somewhat without precedence in my years of adopting building code, that you were given additional tiers that you could adopt. Never had happened before. Of course, we've never had a green building standards before. But again, we did not adopt what's called Tier 1, which is the next level up for beyond Cal Green, except we adopted the REACH code, which matches the energy component for Cal Green Tier 1. And again, when I talk a little bit about lessons learned, there is some confusion on that, and maybe in the question and answers I can go a little bit more into the differences between that. So we have adopted it. It's been in effect since January 1, 2011. Based on the economy, there wasn't a lot of impact in 2011. We didn't do a lot of buildings, didn't do a lot of construction. We probably had plenty of time to sharpen our tools. There wasn't a lot coming through the pipeline for us on it. But I tend to characterize Cal Green in the parlance of building and safety. It's a plan checkers code. Basically, it is a numbers code. It is a submit the information to tell us how you will comply with it. December 31st, 2010, the standard was here. The standard now is 15% higher. Practical applications, generally most REACH code compliance that we see thus far is done with the efficiency of the equipment that they're putting in on it, is usually the first tier at doing it. We've seen a little redesign on openings on that, but again, we've gotten so efficient at the openings. So again, for the most part, the REACH code compliance is really achieved during the plan check process. When it comes out of plan check for permit issuance, we've done, the designers have done their work, we've reviewed it, we've approved it on it. It's had very little impact on our inspectors. Well, as I said, I've done this for a number of years. I actually did the first enforcement in the building codes for insulation. When we made that change, we had never insulated buildings before, and suddenly that was now part of the code. Well, at that point, it was just another code requirement for me as an inspector, but it is not the same as Cal Green. Just for comparison, Cal Green is much more intensive on the inspector part of it. The Cal Green enforcement is very much on both on the construction, on the end part of the process. Has a requirement that if you're over 10,000 square feet, it's similar to a LEED's report on the compliance of the building on it. But again, back to a REACH code, as far as the impact on the jurisdictions, it is a numbers. It is a plan checking process. It hasn't lengthened our plan checking process out at all. As we talk about the cost of everything, if you can show to them it's not that great a cost, and Javier and others have talked on the energy saving and the payback, then sometimes people who are concerned will talk about time. You know, it's going to take more time. And I said, well, I don't think it takes your designers any longer to prepare a REACH code compliance structure, a compliance package, and it doesn't take our plan checkers any longer to do it, and it doesn't take our inspectors any longer to do the inspection on that with it. The sort of the impact, as I said, on the REACH code on the 2011 is very minimal because we just didn't have any development coming through. We have now started to see the payoff for adopting the REACH code. We have 4 large new commercial buildings going in, 200,000 square feet. And again, for a city of our size, that's a lot of development for us. We have a large commercial tenant TI build out over 120,000 square feet. What we're really seeing it is the multifamily development. Goleta serves as student housing for UCSB. As I said, I work a number of jurisdictions. It's really the only jurisdiction I'm currently working in that does a lot of rental housing with that the people who build these buildings are the ones who rent them and therefore have the benefit of the energy savings on it. One of your arguments from developers in building a new single-family dwelling is the benefit goes to the buyer. I mean, he has to sort of recover his cost in selling the building, but he's not going to be the one to achieve the payback on the energy on that. As I said, we have so we have 28 new buildings and over 400 dwelling units going in, and there are rentals. So it is the developers who are complying with the REACH code. It is the developers who own these buildings and who will get the benefit of the REACH code on it. Sort of the future of the REACH code. As you know, the new energy requirements have been adopted, will go into effect on it, and it's sort of caught up with us on the REACH code for the most part. The Cal Green did something a little bit different. Again, these are new areas for us. The code cycles have always been on 3-year cycles with mostly minor changes in between, but they've already modified Cal Green. Cal Green, as adopted and enforced for the first 18 months, was only new buildings. But starting July 1st, we will now capture large remodels and additions. They're set at valuation and square footage on that. So we already have a Cal Green change on that. Goleta is now working on a green building program, and that they will incorporate as part of the REACH code on it. So let me just go over some of the lessons learned, and when Javier was talking about a tale of two cities. Political will is fleeting. The energy numbers are there, but as I said, we started with 6 cities and 1 county. 1 city had led the way. As of today, only 1 city adopted the REACH code. The city of Santa Barbara did not adopt a new REACH code. There was a change in the makeup of the council, and they decided not to do it. Goleta did do it, but we sold it under the idea it was all 6 of us were going to do it, and including plus the county. Did not happen on it. I'm not sure today I could do a REACH code, or at least I couldn't do it under the sort of the what we did on it. What helps us is green building code is in our general plan, a commitment to a green building code, and we tagged onto that with the energy on it. Sort of some of the downside of it, now that we have a REACH code in effect, the development community uses that as an argument against doing a green building code, against doing other things, that we already have the REACH code in effect. Again, as we said, the new Cal Green requirements are went into effect on July 1. Why do you need a green building code? Why do you need to consider a new REACH code? You already have these going into effect. Again, for me, I would recommend in going with a REACH code that you adopt it on the triannual cycle basis, present it as a package of codes going to the city. I think it is less of a target and a concern going forward on that. So that is Goleta's story. We'll work our way back and we'll do some questions.
All right, thank you. Stephen, do you want to give us your tale of what happened in Redwood City and kind of what drove the city to go down this road?
Sure. I'm Steve Davis, and I've worked for 4 cities, so I didn't match Jim's 26 cities as building official, but I previously was a building official in Fremont, and I was actively involved in Fremont when Fremont adopted their REACH code, the additional energy conservation over what the basic Title 24 required. Now I'm the building official in Redwood City. Redwood City had previously adopted that. So I can talk about it from 2 perspectives, being involved directly in adopting and now in the role of enforcing the code. We started out with talking about the tale of 2 cities. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area and have worked in cities up there, and I think it is very different than the environment in Southern California. In the Bay Area, there is a lot of collaboration between the different governments, but there's significant political will to do things that are really green. So I was confronted in Fremont. It wasn't my idea to adopt a more aggressive energy standard. It came from the council. And the fact is, it came from the council, and sort of staff were trying to hold them back and say, well, maybe we don't want to be so aggressive. But in reality, we had to succumb to that. We had to finally hunker down and do the work to come up with a code. So that's very different. The other thing, in Northern California, it's very highly unionized, and there's a strong lobby from construction. So the Building Trades Council, they're intimately involved in all the projects, all the big projects that are approved. They want to be involved because what they want to do is they want to have labor agreements in all of those projects so that they can preserve the jobs for the union construction workers. So all of those things really, I think, encourage us to focus on development, and it doesn't matter if it's more involved. The development community and the building community, all of the builders, they really want us to push. They want us to have more restrictive, because then they can say, oh, we have the qualified workers. We're the only ones that can do that. So it's a different environment. So that is very tied in with the politics. So besides sort of the public push for more green things to happen, we have that collaboration. So while I was in Fremont, And we were looking at trying to adopt a REACH code. What we decided to do as part of our 2010 code adoption, that we would adopt, we assumed that we would adopt the Cal Green Tier 1. So the basic requirement there is a 15% reduction in the energy budget over Title 24. There's many other things in there as well, but that's sort of the thing that we focused on. And when you're going to adopt a code that has a more restrictive energy component, the California Energy Commission says you have to do some work and you have to demonstrate that that's cost effective. And so what does that mean? Those are kind of things that we don't deal with on a regular basis. So I'll start there. How we approached that is we went to our utility. So we're serviced by PG&E. Most of the utility companies have done the work. They've hired the consultants, and they've, in each climate zone, looked at what it would cost for representative projects to meet Title 24 and then to exceed it by 15%. So that is the best source for information. So we went to PG&E. PG&E had performed this study, and for a number of different projects, a small residential project, a big residential, a low-rise multi-residential, all the way up to a high-rise commercial, they had done this work, and that was the basis for us to look at that. And then we had to try and answer the question, what does it mean to be cost-effective? Well, when you look at cost-effectiveness, you usually look at what the cost is and what the payback period would be, and then you have to compare that to some baseline standard. So how we approached it, we said, well, we're looking at building new buildings and looking at the life of buildings. So we said, well, what's the average useful life of a new building? So we said between 50 and 80 years, so we said 65 years. And then we looked at the data that we had from the utility companies, and for the kinds of projects we were going to include in our regulations, the average payback period was in the 20-year range. So we said, okay, if you make an investment up front and it's going to be paid back by the savings on utilities in 20 years, and that's less than the useful life of the building, then that's a cost-effective project. So that's not written down anywhere, but if you want to have a basis for just trying to convince your council or convince the public that an investment is cost-effective, I think that that's a good way to approach it. So in Fremont, what we were going to do is look at Cal Green Tier 1. The next question we had to answer was what projects are going to make that apply to. So there was some, similar to Goleta, the debate was, well, clearly it's easy to do it in brand new construction. That's really simple. You can do your analysis and it's easy to build in the efficiency. And we decided not to apply our code there to any additions. The other thing we looked at, is it going to be residential or commercial? And that's an interesting, different approach. So on the residential side, we did our outreach and we talked to developers. And actually it was interesting. We talked to a local builder called Robeson Homes. So they were building tract homes. And what they said to us is, we like the idea of having a green designation by the city, and it's a good marketing opportunity for us to, when we're trying to sell the homes, to say we've exceeded Title 24, that we have more efficient design and construction, and that to them was really important because there's a lot of competition in the housing market, and they thought that that would give them an opportunity to sell more homes. We also worked with the not-for-profit housing organizations and Mid-Peninsula Housing. So they actually are advocates and they build low-cost housing in our region. And they said, for similar reasons, that they'd like to reduce the cost, the holding or the operating costs for the residents in the housing. And they said that it's important for them, and they invite the city to make this additional requirement because they support that that's a way to help make living more sustainable for the folks that they represent. So we had done that outreach, and then as far as commercial is concerned, commercial is a little different because you don't typically have an owner and an occupant being the same entity. So most of the commercial that is constructed is spec construction, where you have someone come in, and the commercial builders were not so interested in increasing their first construction cost, and they didn't see, so they're not thinking about the holding costs or the life costs of the building. And in addition, we had sort of the economic development folks within our organization saying, gee, we don't want to apply additional or have additional standards for our city because it's competitive out there. It was a down economy, and we want to have the commercial projects decide to come to our city. We don't want them to be shopping around and say, oh, we're not going to Fremont because it's more restrictive there. So we decided only to apply to brand new residential construction. So I thought we had the good political will, and we said, okay, we have support from those who have an interest in building those kinds of projects. So that's how we decided to move forward. In addition to doing our sort of our checking in with the interested parties, we also did some outreach. We had 3 forums where we invited the public to come in. And the interesting thing, it's hard to get people to be engaged, to be a part of the process. And so we had 2 midday, or 1 midday community forum, and we had 2 evening community forums, and we had no residents from the community come to be part of that process. So that was a little surprising to me because I thought there would be more people interested. But I think people's lives are so complex now that they don't come be part of that. So my advice, if you're thinking about trying to adopt a more restrictive energy code, is to go to the development community, go to the folks who have a firsthand stake in projects, try and build some consensus there on what you might be willing to move forward with or what they might be willing to accept, and that's probably the best way. I think that it's good public policy to try and invite the community, but don't go to an extreme extent trying to invite the public to be part of that process. So once I had gotten through all of that part, I actually had some challenges trying to convince the internal staff within the organization that it was a good idea to think about imposing additional requirements on projects. And I really got more pushback from the inspectors. So in my case, I had a group of individuals that had long tenure with the city, and I think they looked at this and say, oh, it's more to learn. Not only do we have to sort of keep current on the regular increases or changes that come with the codes, but now we're looking at doing something that's a little more restrictive. So sort of the discussion about whether it's sort of an inspector's involvement in the code versus plan check. What I did is I talked to them about the fact that we're talking about achieving a more energy efficient project. That's going to be done by the plan checkers, by the energy consultants who do the calculations. So that was my way to get to a point. It's like it's still enforcing the same requirements on the plans. You just look at the plans. And so that was my strategy to get them to be involved and to support the project or support the new regulation. So that was my experience in Fremont. And as I said, now I'm in Redwood City. And in Redwood City, they actually were one of the leaders in the region. And in 2009, they adopted some standards. And the standard that they adopted is the Build It Green checklist. So in our region, again, there's been a lot of community involvement and city involvement in putting together the Build It Green checklist. And if you haven't looked at that, on the flash drive that you were provided, I gave you some links to the website. But in our region, that is sort of a checklist, sort of like the Cal Green checklist. But you go in there and you pick components that you're going to include in your project. Based on that, you get points. And the goal there is to achieve 50 points, and that demonstrates that you have a green project. So that's been in place in Redwood City, and it's an easy regulation to enforce. As I said, the folks, when they come in and they check what the requirements are, they find out they need to do it. They do their energy calculations, and they do their checklists, submit those, so it's really pretty easy to enforce. And with that, maybe we can move on, and I'm available to answer specific questions about other things that we did.
Martha, you've got slides.
Okay, so my name is Martha Brooke. I work at the Energy Commission. I've worked there a long time, and Nancy Jenkins, sitting right over there, used to work with me there before she came down to Southern California and started working for the Southern California Edison. So what I wanted to talk about is a colleague of mine at the Energy Commission actually works with local governments and helps them get the Energy Commission approval for their energy ordinances that is required. And so he put together a few slides about the process of getting that approval with the Energy Commission, and so I'm going to go through that with you. Then I want to give you just a 3-minute update about the most recent building energy efficiency standards that will go into the California Building Code starting in 2014. As you heard from Javier in the other room, we've done some good work and some significant advancements in energy efficiency for both new and existing buildings in terms of additions and alterations. And then I'm also going to talk with you about the update to the voluntary part of CalGreen, the Tier 1, Tier 2 type of voluntary energy efficiency standards that are in the voluntary appendices of CalGreen available for adoption by local governments. So as Jim said, there are 2 different state commissions in terms of building codes that local governments need to get approval on. The first one is if you want a local energy standard above Title 24 Part 6, which is where our base energy standards end up in the California Building Code. It has to come to the California Energy Commission. If you want to do more advanced things for plumbing, mechanical, construction standards, then you have to go to the California Building Standards Commission. So the application to the Energy Commission is the required documentation is a copy of your energy ordinance, and if it looks like I'm reading these slides, it's because I'm reading these slides. These aren't mine, and I don't know this material on the back of my hand. So the second thing is a study or analysis, and you've heard this, so we can go pretty quickly. A study or analysis that proves that the energy savings that you expect from the REACH standards are cost effective. And a statement finding that the ordinance will require buildings to consume no more energy than our base standard in Title 24 Part 6. And there has to be some public event where you've noticed the community that this action is going to take place and you've gotten their feedback. And there's a letter to our executive director assuring them that the city and county or county will continue to enforce our building standards as well as your proposed ordinance. And then the new thing for I don't know when this came into effect. I'm guessing just in the last year that there's now a requirement that you do your environmental SEEC compliance. That your ordinance actually meets the environmental requirements for that. And okay, so when does your energy ordinance actually need to get Energy Commission approval? If you're adopting a green building standard and it has a mandatory energy efficiency requirement, then you need to get review and approval by the Energy Commission. If it's a non-government certification program such as Build It Green, then you also need to, that includes an energy efficiency component, then you need to come to the Energy Commission. So that's Greenpoint Rated, which is the Build It Green program, LEED, or other certification programs. If you adopt the voluntary Tier 1 or Tier 2 level of efficiency in CalGreen, and just to be crystal clear, CalGreen is just a nickname for a section of the building code which we call Title 24 Part 11. So that's what CalGreen is. It's not a separate certification program or anything. It's just part of the California Building Standard. And then if you actually want to adopt, say for example, if you wanted to adopt the standards that we just adopted at the Energy Commission that won't get implemented into the building standard, into building code until 2014, if you wanted to take the initiative to adopt that early, you would have to get that energy ordinance approved by the Energy Commission. And we'd love for you to do that because we've already proved that those are cost effective. or adoption of stricter energy budgets in general. So that's I think like your REACH code, which is 15% better than our base energy budget. Or if you're renewing or updating your existing energy ordinance. So this is new for 2013, evidence of CEQA compliance. The local agency, so you guys are the lead agency from the CEQA perspective, and you must include any findings, determinations, declarations, reports, declaring that your ordinance has a negative declaration, basically has no adverse environmental impact. And then the Energy Commission is responsible for reviewing and considering your exemption or your justification for why you've made that determination. So what do we do once we get your application? We ensure that the buildings will consume no more energy than our base code. We make sure that your requirements are clear and that they ensure greater energy efficiency. That they're, again, clear statements that you'll enforce our standards, and that exceptions or exemptions are explicitly limited to the ordinance and do not affect compliance with our standards. And we look for elements that may trigger a federal preemption. So this is government talk for equipment efficiency. The federal government sets appliance efficiencies which cover equipment like heating and air conditioning equipment, water heaters. And there's a federal rule that says a state agency or a local agency can't exceed a standard if the federal government has set a standard on that equipment. So federal preemption means that we're all preempted from adopting an equipment efficiency that's higher than the federal level of efficiency. And we're often tempted to do that, to be honest with you, because we find that equipment efficiency is one of the most cost-effective ways to increase building energy efficiency. And so we do quite a bit of work at the Energy Commission to figure out other more creative ways to get to those same levels of efficiency. And that's one of the values of our performance approach. Our performance compliance approach basically says that you can meet our energy budget any way you want, but we've set that budget with no more than that federal level of equipment efficiency. That means one of the easiest ways for anybody to meet our energy budget is, and cost-effective ways to do that, is to just take the step of choosing a piece of equipment that is above that federal level of efficiency. And Joe, this is we, as in Joe and the mouse in his pocket, he will gladly review your draft ordinance. He's a very nice guy, and he his responsibility, his primary responsibility, is actually to help local governments meet their obligation with the Energy Commissions. And he's had quite a bit of experience and can give you references to other cities that have gone through this, and you can, I think, get quite a bit of help from him. So this is a set of resources for you. This slide deck isn't in your flash drive, but Javier can help get it to you if you're interested. And so now I'm going to move quickly on to just a preview of what we've done in the last 2 years in terms of moving our building energy efficiency standards for the whole state up to a more aggressive level. We think that our first year savings for the new code that will again go into effect in January 2014 will save over 400 gigawatt hours and 11 million therms of gas just in the first year. Most of these savings, over 90%, are coming from the commercial building sector. There's just a lot of energy in commercial buildings, and therefore a lot of energy to save in commercial buildings. And the other thing that we've done is we've actually reached out to kind of beyond the normal scope of the building standard and started looking at large process energy systems in commercial buildings that use a lot of energy, like commercial refrigeration, commercial kitchen exhausts, data centers, and looked for areas in those building types where we could save energy. And we're estimating that after 30 years, so once these buildings, are built year after year or modified year after year, after 30 years, we'll save an equivalent of 6 power plants, almost 2 million homes worth of energy. And if you looked at the emissions of your iPads, the sort of life cycle emissions of your iPad, the amount of energy that we're saving is in emissions equivalency is equivalent to 140 million iPads. That's if you stack them pancake style. It's 560 miles high, so it's a lot of iPads. So just a quick view of some of the highlights for residential buildings. Better windows, both the heat transfer through the window and the solar heat gain limitations through those windows has been increased in our standards. More wall insulation in all climate zones. Mandatory heating and air conditioning system and distribution system installation testing. So this is that one alone is huge for us, because right now typically heating and air conditioning equipment is installed in homes without proper refrigerant charge, without proper airflow, with leaky distribution systems or duct systems. And we're actually requiring them to be tested now for every home, every new home that's built, that these systems are actually getting installed correctly. So it's kind of surprising that it took us 30 years to do this, but we're glad that we're actually accomplishing it this cycle. We're also, for the first time, have a prescriptive requirement for whole house fans in several climate zones. So when we say prescriptive requirement, that means that you don't have to put it in every building, but it sets the energy budget. So we expect in certain climate zones that you'll use a whole house fan instead of turning on your air conditioning, because we have such a great climate for that. You know, and a lot of us know the benefits of those technologies because we voluntarily install them in our existing houses. We've improved the hot water system performance, saving both energy and water. There's still a lot to go here, but we are making advances in this area. And for the first time ever, we're basically requiring builders to preserve a certain amount of roof space for a future installation of either solar water heating system or a solar electric system. So basically, just to be a little thoughtful about where you put your vents that puncture the roof plane, so that you can preserve a nice spot for a solar system. And then we've spent quite a bit of time simplifying the rules for additions and alterations, which over 30 years had gotten to be very complex. So for non-residential buildings, probably the biggest thing that we're doing is we're requiring multi-level lighting controls in office buildings. So, you know, just dimming ballasts and other technologies that allow you to control the light in rooms automatically. We have a lower threshold for when lighting alterations need to meet code requirements. Right now, our code says that if you touch more than 50% of the lights in this room, for example, you'd have to bring the whole room up to code. We've dropped that threshold down to 10%. So now if you just touch 10% of these lights in this room, you have to bring the whole room up to code. Daylighting, we're doing a lot of great things in daylighting. We've got a great requirement for visual transmittance in windows. So basically we're requiring windows in commercial buildings to bring in a lot more light, and still have really good heat transfer and solar heat gain performance as well. And then we're coupling that daylighting, that coming through the window, with better lighting control, so that you can actually take advantage of the fact that you're getting more light into the building by dimming your lights or turning them off when that daylight is available. We have that same requirement for solar-ready roofs for commercial buildings that I talked about. Then on the heating and cooling side, we're requiring smaller equipment to include economizers, which is basically the ability to bring outside air in and use outside air to cool your building when the temperature's right. And then we're also having more and more requirements for this equipment to be able to modify its speed to adjust for different amount of heating and cooling in spaces. We also have a cooling tower water efficiency requirement for the first time, so we're saving lots and lots of water just with this one measure by just doing some real simple things like having drift eliminators on large cooling towers, so that the spray doesn't just get wasted on a windy day. And as I said, for process energy systems, we've included new requirements for several of those. I'll keep reaching for that. Okay, so now I'm gonna quickly go through and again, this is draft on every slide, because the Title 24 Part 11, the updates to the Cal Green code is still in development process. We've vetted it through many workshops, but there's still a process that we work with the California Building Standards Commission to get our energy recommendations into the whole body of the Cal Green Code. So we're in the process of that now. For all non-residential buildings, we have a small set of prerequisites that we're recommending if you want to go beyond our base standard. We think that it's a no-brainer to have high efficacy outdoor lighting, basically just good, efficient, controllable outdoor lighting. And then for very large restaurants, a requirement that a part of your water heating load needs to be served by a solar system. Either that or you have to have a very high efficient water heater. So those are very cost effective and we thought should be prerequisites for all buildings that are applicable there. Then for our Tier 1 requirements, we're saying that it basically has to be 5% better than the base energy budget. If you're adding, these cover both new and existing buildings. So for existing additions and alterations and newly constructed non-residential buildings. Because we've pushed the non-residential base code so far, we're backing down on our recommendations for REACH by saying you only need to be 5% better if you're just touching a lighting system, for example, or if you're just doing a mechanical change out, you should be 5% better than the base code. If you're doing both of those, if you're doing lighting and mechanical, then Tier 1 would be a 10% improvement in the energy budget. For Tier 2, we're basically just but ratcheting that up a level, so it's 10% better if you have one type of system, lighting or mechanical, and 15% if you have lighting and mechanical. And we're basically saying that if you're just doing a shell-only construction or you're just modifying and altering an envelope component, you don't need to do anything beyond our Part 6, because we've really pushed the envelope, like I said, with those big lighting requirements for windows. We have building envelope ceiling for the first time in our base code. So we're really pushing, no pun intended, we're pushing the envelope. So we couldn't justify ourselves needing to go beyond that for a REACH code. For residential, we have separate requirements. It wasn't as easy to bundle it all together for residential. We had to be a little bit more thoughtful. So for newly constructed buildings, I'll do that first, and then I'll finish with the additions and alterations. We're setting a prerequisite recommendation for a whole building design rating. If you're familiar with the existing buildings and what they're talking about next door in the Energy Upgrade California program is using the home energy rating system to understand where your building's performance is in relationship to zero, in relationship to a code building. So we're not calling it a HERS rating here because that's got a very specific connotation for existing buildings, and we don't want to confuse people with that, but we're using the same scale and the same metric to measure this. So basically we're just calling it a whole building design rating. But the idea is that we start thinking about these buildings from the whole energy use perspective, and instead of saying percent better of what, it's kind of confusing, and it really doesn't get people to think about getting to zero. So what we want to do is actually make a conscious decision to report that whole building design rating and to get people to thinking about what it means in terms of where they are on the scale of getting to zero. So that's why we're recommending that. The quality insulation inspection, this is another, in our opinion, no-brainer. We expect to get this into our mandatory standards in the 2016 update. We tried hard to get it in there this time, but we had a lot of resistance from the builders. It's basically just eliminating or really reducing construction defects within the envelope, just checking to make sure that you've sealed the building where you need to and you've got the proper amount of insulation and it's installed correctly, so it's actually getting the performance that we all expect it to be getting. And then high efficacy indoor lighting and outdoor lighting. So there's actually a lot of energy savings here to be garnered. It's interesting, the lighting for residential has never been part of our energy budget. We'll probably be doing that in the 2016 update. But we've always had just mandatory lighting requirements for residential. So now we're saying, and again, these are likely to become the base standard for the 2016 update, would be all high efficacy lighting. So then tier 1 for newly constructed residential is 15% better than energy budget. Now the other thing that we're adding is that if you've got a very large house, and it's not really very large in some climate zones, it might be more of a typical house in like the Palm Springs area. If you've got an expected limit of an expected energy consumption of 10,000 kW kilowatt hours per year or more, you have to offset that with additional energy efficiency or solar electric system. And we've set this limit based on analysis that we did to basically, if you're using that much energy, electricity in this case, you're at that highest rate of on your energy bill. You're at the tier 3 rate or whatever, and you're paying a significant amount for that electricity. And at that point, it's actually cost effective to put solar on to offset that electricity use. Tier 2 is just a ratchet up from that in terms of 30% better, and the limit for how much electricity you get to use gets ratcheted down a bit. And again, we're saying that, oh, I already said that. So this is very similar to what is in the current Cal Green in terms of 15 and 30% better, but it has this additional kicker that says if you've got a large house, and I think Marin County has had this type of an ordinance for years in terms of limiting very large houses in terms of the expected energy or electricity use from those houses. And one more piece that we're proposing, and again, this hasn't been adopted, but the staff is very interested in doing this, is setting an elective zero net energy performance level in the standard. So again, we don't see this as a tier that would likely be adopted by a local government because we don't think you could prove that it's cost effective for every building. But certainly you could see that we've already determined it's cost effective for the largest buildings. There might be other areas where it is cost effective, or somebody just wants to voluntarily meet a level of energy performance that that meets our state policy goals, and we wanted to get this into the standard so people could actually get acknowledged for that, or actually, at least understand that we're serious about our goal, and to the extent that we're actually going to put an elective, voluntary level of performance in our building standards for zero net energy. And again, the way that we measure this is with our energy efficiency software, where we compute the energy budgets. We add in the amount of energy that we expect from the appliances and the plug loads that aren't part of the energy code, but we all use in our homes to get to that whole building number. And then you have to get to zero or less to be called a zero net energy house. And for additions and alterations, let me get this through this quickly. It's the same prerequisites I talked about before. What we're trying to do is that because we know that most of the work that's going to be going on for several years is really in the existing building market and not in newly constructed buildings, we want to make sure that the REACH standards really can be applied to existing buildings. So in this case, we've backed down the performance level that's necessary, and we've thought carefully about differentiating between what type of systems that you're doing in terms of additions and alterations. So for tier 1, we're proposing that you should be 5% better than the energy budget if you're modifying your cooling system, your heating system, or your water heating system. We call all of those mechanical systems. So if it's only one mechanical system, so you're only doing a water heater replacement, or you're only doing something with your heating and cooling system, you should be 5% better than the base code. If you're doing 2 or more of those systems, then you should be 10% better than the base code if you're an existing building. So then tier 2, again, is just a ratchet up from that, is 10% better if it's just one system that's getting modified, and 15% better if it's 2 or more systems. And then we're basically saying that if you are just modifying your envelope, changing out your windows, or adding insulation, again, because we've really focused on the envelope for the base standard, we don't think you need to go beyond that, but you should think seriously about adopting those prerequisites because those are very cost effective. Okay, so this is the end for me. I just wanted to acknowledge that we have ongoing challenges. So we're not going to get to zero net energy without changing building practice, and you know, and the California builders that we've worked with through our stakeholder processes are asking us for demonstrations of how they can do this. So prove to us that it's cost effective. Prove to us that we don't have to do 2x4 construction. Prove to us that we can have a centrally located water heater with short pipes that don't waste water and energy. So, you know, I think there's an opportunity for local governments, for utilities, for the state to help in getting some of these demonstrations out and working directly with the builders to get them to adopt these technologies. And then, of course, you know, improving code compliance is huge, and it can never be understated. That's really where all the energy savings are, and anything that we can do to get people to pull permits, it's huge. And it's huge for you guys too, because that's where you're getting some of your income from. So, and then the last thing I want to leave with is just this challenge of what we call unregulated loads. So everything that we plug into outlets that we don't control either with our building standards or our appliance standards, it's the biggest load. They're the biggest loads in the house. So this is just a little bean counting exercise we did to say that even if we push really, really hard in the building standards, we're touching less than half of the energy use of the building. In this case, it's not so bad for commercial buildings. This is a residential example. We think we're touching less than half of the energy use in the home by our building standards. And so as we ratchet that energy use down and down and down, we have this increasing, escalating energy use from all those miscellaneous loads that are a huge challenge. And you know, we all love to charge up all of our electronic devices. So, but we do have a battery charger standard in our appliance group that they're working on, actually making every one of our little chargers more efficient. So those are the things we have to keep looking at in different ways that we can save energy. And again, just a couple contacts information. I'm not the one to talk to about local ordinances. Joe Lawyer is. If you want to talk about development, I'd love to talk with you about it.
Thank you, all right. That was a lot of info. Okay. And so the ideal is to overwhelm you and to see that you've got resources available to you. And just to make a quick plug for Codes and Standards, it's probably one of those programs you never heard of, but can actually provide you with a lot of good technical assistance. Again, as Steve mentioned when he was up in Fremont, the cost effectiveness study is something that the statewide Codes and Standards program put together, working with CEC staff, in this case Joe Lawyer, and said, what are the things that you're looking for from the Energy Commission level in order for you guys to feel comfortable to approve these applications? And so we worked on the methodology and the assumptions and what kind of building prototypes should be studied for residential, multifamily, commercial, and what are the assumptions based on the different climate zones. And I think, you know, sometimes keeping it simple makes all the difference in the world. And I really am proud of this elegant solution. The approach up until then was kind of doing it on a city by city, which we thought that would be terribly expensive. And so the stroke of genius was to say, well, if there's like 80 or 100 jurisdictions in a climate zone, because the state of California is split into 16 climate zones. If we did a cost-effectiveness study per climate zone, can any of those jurisdictions use that study as part of their application process? And that's when Joe said, sure. And that was the breakthrough. So we had to, I shouldn't say we just only had to do 16 climate zone studies, but we only just had to do 16 climate zone studies. And so what we got now was something that was standardized. But what works in climate zone 6, which is by the ocean, versus climate zone 10, which is more of a desert, inland, different assumptions, different cost effectiveness, et cetera. But that was a breakthrough. And so a lot of this stuff, 2-3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago tops, and we learned a lot. And I think what you have here are the folks that we learned with them. And so the Codes and Standards program, I co-manage it with my peers. I've got a counterpart at PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, and SoCal Gas, and then at Edison. We're a small team, but we work very closely with Martha Brooks, for example, with her team. This 2013 Building Energy Code, Martha, what did we do? We submitted maybe 60 measures from the Codes and Standards Program.
Yeah, I think at least that.
At least 60 measures. And of those 60, maybe half of them got through and adopted in some form or fashion. So utility companies were part of that conversation.
They're a huge part.
And we did a lot of outreach prior to the to CEC then undertaking their workshop process. And so even with all that upfront work, it still was tough. And but we were working together, and I think there's an incredible opportunity here where local government partnership, which is a program through Edison and, well, the utilities, I should say, working with you, the local governments, but also taking advantage of codes and standards. And you kind of should see us more as the technical services aspect. We're not going to advocate for you because we can't. That's not our job. That's your job. I mean, you know your local officials, you know the local politics. The consensus building needs to come from you guys. But we can provide the facts. We can provide technical data. We can defend the technical data. But at the end of the day, it's a political decision. And I think as we move forward, it just got tougher. It really has gotten harder. And the economy is not helping, obviously. And I think people want to do the right thing, but when you look at your pocketbook, that's where most people make their decisions. But I do want to emphasize there is a very strong relationship between the utilities, in this case codes and standards, and the CEC, the folks that are adopting the energy code. And we didn't give much talk, and you should just know in the background, this whole idea of plug load, the appliance Title 20, the plug load or appliance standards. And just think again, anything that plugs into an outlet, that's plug load. And even though there's this federal preemption out there, there's still a lot of things like battery chargers that we went after. And again, the codes and standards folks worked very closely with CEC to get that through, and we're very proud of that. Right now we're looking at 13 additional measures under plug load, under Title 20, including, for example, set boxes. So most of you all probably have cable or some kind of satellite, service or whatnot. That little box that converts that information into something that pops up on your screen, those are set boxes. They're not regulated. Next time you're in your house, go touch that. Just touch it. And we all know, right? If it's hot, that's wasted energy. And I know mine is hot, and that's from ATT Uverse. And before that, I had DirecTV, and they're just as hot. So the point is that that's unregulated. Imagine if we go and we're looking at trying, and again, these are very modest, but they're not being regulated right now. But we're proposing very modest standards to begin with. But when you multiply that by a couple of million, that adds up really, really fast. The battery chargers, I know at my household, there's at least 6 at any given time, okay? Because I've got a teenager and a preteen, and everyone has an iPod, an iPad, a laptop. Just think about your own plug load, just with your electronics. And when it comes to battery chargers, think about your laptop. None of that's regulated until now. And just a significant standard, and you multiply that literally by millions. And so you can imagine the savings there. So while we're talking about this, you should be aware of other things that are going on. So this is not, we're talking about building standards today because that's under local governments, but you need to be aware of the larger conversation that's taking place. So you can put your efforts within that context. And I think that's very important. A lot of folks, we forget why we're doing what we're doing, and we get caught up in details in the weeds. But the larger context is ultimately local governments regulate, through the building permit process, what gets built out there. And that's powerful. And I think one of the things that Martha didn't raise was the issue of cost effectiveness. California Energy Commission does not decide what's cost effective when it comes to a local reach code. Your local decision makers, your local city council or your board of supervisors, if you're a county, they make that decision. And we hope that we're helping by providing them with a cost effectiveness study that we did in conjunction with the California Energy Commission. Now, you still, the elected officials still are on the hook to make that decision. Okay? The California Energy Commission just wants to know, how did you base that decision on, and did you do it in a public hearing process? And there's some additional things, of course, that you also need to provide as part of your application. That is why the Codes and Standards Program jumped on, let's provide one of the more critical tools, which is that study, that cost effectiveness study. But it's just a tool. And I would imagine, again, what Jim and what Steve shared with us, what's more important is that outreach with the home builders. And I find it interesting that for Steve, the home builders were pushing for this, saying this is a good marketing tool for us. And it was kind of like almost the opposite with Jim. And we had someone from Santa Monica here, but she stepped out. But again, Santa Monica, they took about 1.5 years to get it through the process. And these things take a while. There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of education. There's just a lot of technical data that needs to be absorbed, but also trying to figure out how does this contradict CalGreen? Or how does CalGreen fit into the equation? That's one of the things that I think Codes and Standards is looking forward to seeing if we can play a bigger role in trying to demystify this process. So with that said, yes.
Hi, Jillian Rich, Government and Community Partnerships with PG&E. I'm wondering if you could speak about your plans to update the climate zone cost effectiveness studies and what your timeline would be for that. And then also, secondly, I'm wondering if the utility codes and standards departments are going to have any new resources to meet the new SEQA requirement for REACH codes.
Martha, do you want to take a crack at the cost effectiveness study from Energy Commission's standpoint, and then I'll follow up.
So in terms of when, I think it depends on what we propose to do. If you propose to do a REACH code that's a performance based, like a % better, that requires a software calculation, we have to wait until we get our software updated for the 2013 standards, and we're in the middle of that now. We expect to have something that's ready in the spring of 2013. So I don't think that the cost effectiveness studies could be done until after that. So maybe end of the summer 2013, something like that. I mean, I'm just guessing. And you have to answer the SEQA question.
Yeah, as far as SEQA is concerned, that's a great question, and we don't have an answer for it, to be honest with you. It's something that we're definitely talking to CEC staff. Through this conference, I'm reaching out now to the OPR, the Office of Planning Research. Those are folks that we probably should have been talking to 2-3 years ago. But, here's an opportunity to start sharing resources. So it is something that we're going to be looking at. I think the one thing I want to underscore, that with the adoption of the 2013 code, the rules are very different now. I think Martha and I were discussing a different approach for the REACH code, and as you saw, these are just drafts. They haven't been adopted yet. And so it's really hard to say, depending on what gets adopted, that's how we're going to approach what a REACH code is. Is the REACH code, can we simply package these, hey, at the minimum, just adopt these prescriptive things and you're done? So does that require a cost effectiveness study? Because we presume that if that has already been approved by the California Energy Commission, right? I mean, we don't know. There's these open-ended questions that whatever we did now probably does not apply for this next cycle. And we want to underscore, and I think I hit some quick statistics, but I think Title 2013, Title 24, Part 6 is about, for residential, about 25% more stringent for single family than the current code, and 14% or so for multifamily and 30% for non-res based on current code.
But I'd say that also varies by climate zone. So I think that we probably could could find some climate zones where another 5–10% is cost effective, and then many more where maybe you want to do a smaller set of prescriptive requirements so we could also prove our cost effective.
So there you have it. There's a lot of discussions we need to have internally before we can start rolling out, what this is. But I think at the end of the day, again, the way I understand the code, the way it's written, local jurisdictions still have the ability to customize it as they see fit. So we're going to try our best to at least provide a menu, maybe, to keep it simple. But again, what got adopted in Fremont is not the same that got adopted in Redwood City, and it's certainly not the same what got adopted in Goleta. And if you were to go on the CEC website, the California Energy Commission website, they have a list of all the cities, about 40+ cities that have adopted REACH codes. They're all linked. You can get a copy of the ordinance, etc. They're all different. And we tried our best to keep it standardized, and that's just I think the nature of local government. They're going to want to put their own twist on it. Okay. Do I have another question?
Jacob Alvarez with the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. I actually have about 4 questions, but some of them are really quick answers. So you referenced the Palm Springs area in terms of a large house. So what's considered a large house?
So we didn't do that analysis based on house size. We did it on that electricity consumption, but we're guessing that just because the loads in Palm Springs are so high in terms of air conditioning, that I would guess that a largest house, I don't know, I guess a few thousand square feet would hit that limit in terms of air conditioning and electricity use. But I can do some better math and let you know. Yeah,
because I would say that I'd be guessing, but the average size house is probably about 2,000 square feet. So that's why I want to understand what that is.
Yeah, so I'm not saying, I don't think it's a mansion. I don't think it's a mini mansion, but I think it's probably between a 2,000 square foot house and a mini mansion where you're going to hit that limit.
And then you mentioned, or I know that there's the draft for 2013. Right now we're working on a green building code, and the one thing that's been brought up kind of consistently is, well, have you guys seen the new updates? How come the code that you guys are working on isn't on that? Now, the easy government answer is, well, it's not set policy, so of course we can't work on that. But is it anticipated that you're just going through the process now, or that there's also other additions that could come into the code?
So the Part 6 code that I gave the update on with the residential slide and the non-res slide, that's been adopted by the Energy Commission. And we're going through the final rulemaking documentation, basically responding to every public comment that we heard during the process. And then we take that to the Building Standards Commission in December, and they approve it.
Okay.
And I don't think that they've ever not approved something that the Energy Commission has adopted, and we don't expect them to do that this time. But you're right, it's not completely finalized yet.
Okay, so it'd be good to, if we were looking at it in the future, that we could go, that's pretty much the templates there. We could, if anything's extracted, to be very minimal.
Yeah.
Okay, and then though another issue in terms of existing residential, the one thing that that comes into play is, I know we're looking at the whole house retrofit, especially with the energy upgrade, but a lot of times I would say that our residents are looking towards, my mom needs a new kitchen. It's always a singular type situation, or there's a room extension or something along those lines. So is there a way that I guess that the government's trying to basically look at that and apply it to those type of, I guess, situations as well versus the whole house? Because I get the whole house, but most people don't go into it going, I'm just going to do an energy upgrade.
Right. So when I presented the slide that talked about residential additions and alterations, and talked about 5% if you had one mechanical change, and 10% if you had 2 or more, that's what we're thinking about for those situations. So for example, if you're going to replace a water heater, or if you're going to do something with your heating or cooling system, then you can do a little bump up. The good thing about having it as a performance basis is that you can find the whole house to make your improvement in, and it would still count, even though what you're really trying to do is just, you know, install a water heater, for example. So I think there are opportunities there, and we definitely thought about that and ratcheted back the required level of improvement because we're thinking that it would be harder to do in additions and alterations.
Okay.
Than
And
newly constructed.
then this is the fun question. In terms of the agencies working together, have you guys considered any sort of legislations in terms of time of purchase retrofits for existing residential?
Yeah, so actually we have legislation. It was passed in 2009. It's called AB 758. And it's basically, what we call it as a comprehensive program to improve the efficiency of existing buildings. It covers both residential and commercial buildings. And one of the things that's in the legislation is to consider ratings and disclosures. So a time of sale was what we would call a disclosure. You have to disclose a rating, or you have to make an improvement at a time of sale. So it's not a time of sale legislation. In fact, there's very careful language in there that says you can't disrupt the transaction process of a real estate deal. If we did anything, we'll always have to figure out how to do that without disrupting the process. But we think we have the mandate to do it, and we're just beginning the process of scoping what that program should be, how it should work with the utilities incentive programs and codes and standards programs. We think there's huge opportunities there. And I'm not sure it's time of sale or just some sort of thing more like the smog check, every once in a while with a sort of a date certain improvement. So my sort of naive idea is that if you set a requirement saying in 5 years or in 10 years you have to meet this level of performance, then the utility programs could spend the next 5 years helping you get there and help financially for you to get there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
And with that, it's 3:45, and that ends this session. And if you would join me in a nice round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much.